US Secretary of State Blinken has called the sabotage of Nordstream 1 and 2 a tremendous opportunity. Aussie journalists avoid mentioning that a successful China women's basketball player currently whipping ass in Australia is a Uygur, and former US President Carter, a massive China supporter, turns 98. All in today's Quick 3. Let's get reporting. Nord Stream 1 and 2, the underwater pipelines created to pump much-needed natural gas from Russia to Europe, were sabotaged this week using explosives. Now, everyone knows this was a deliberate act, but no one's willing to come out and say blatantly that the USA, desperate to cling on to its final years as king of the world, is the most likely culprit. Washington knows that full well, which is why US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is able to say the quiet part out loud. In a press event on September 30, Blinken called the destruction of the pipelines a tremendous opportunity to end Europe's reliance on Russian energy, which has been a major thorn in the side of Western elites. He said Russia no longer being able to pipe much needed energy to Europe created a tremendous strategic opportunity for years to come, and added that the US is now the leading supplier of LNG to Europe to help compensate for any gas or oil that it's losing as a result of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So, does anyone still have any doubts about who's behind this? Australian anti-China journalist Bill Birtles seemed to be eliciting yellow fever in this tweet about there being a lot of Chinese supporters in Sydney when the Chinese women's basketball team beat Aussie for a spot in the finals. But what's more interesting is that he and other Aussie journalists refuse to mention who this woman is. I'll tell you, her name is Delana Delixiata, a member of the China team who also happens to be Uygur. So why the silence? Well, it's clear that her success story and her ability to travel the world goes directly against the Western mainstream media narrative that Uyghur people are prisoners, victims of genocide and unable to leave Xinjiang, let alone China. If they let Australian audiences know Delana's story at all, it risks derailing their whole Xinjiang genocide propaganda narrative. And of course, they can't let that happen. Interesting, isn't it? Former US President Jimmy Carter turned 98 today. Many don't know that Carter is a massive fan of China and that he calls the USA the most warlike country on earth. A former US president. So why aren't more media sharing his views? Well, we all know the answer. So in celebration of Carter's milestone, let's take a quick listen to some of the things he said about China in recent years.
In the last number of years, since 1949 when we normalized relations, the United States has been at constant war with Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Yemen and many other countries. Almost constant war. And the expert economists estimate that we've spent about $3 trillion on those wars. China has not been in combat with anybody since 1949. And they have that, you might say that same $3 trillion, they have a very flourishing economy, to spend on things good for the Chinese people. I'll just give you 2 or 3 examples right quick. One is that they have 18,000 miles of high-speed railroad. A child born in Beijing now, with all of its smog, has a life expectancy of 5 years more than a child born in Washington, D.C.
Happy birthday, Mr. President. See you all next time.